Hello there, everyone. It is Christy. It is Sunday, and it is time for Weekend Winters. I hope you are doing well. I'm sorry, I was just like struggling to do my setup today. Everything was running late. But hey, you know, what am I only 3 minutes late? My apologies for that, everyone. But I wanted to make sure you could see me. That seemed like everything set up, and then my camera didn't work. I hope you guys are doing well, wherever it is, whenever it is you are. I'm not entirely done getting set up, but let's go ahead and pop out the chat so I can see you guys. And just as a heads up, my aim, we'll see how it goes, is that I'm hoping to have a strict hour. Because I have things I need to do today. But of course I want to talk to you guys, because that's what I promise. I show up without Kevin at least once a week to talk about politics, try to monetize a little bit of content on my channel. Yeah, and have a bit of a chat. So I want to talk about two things mostly today. The first being, I'm going to try to bop this up. Yeah, let's call it 125. That's it. You've managed to be here. Woohoo! Thank you, Daria. So yes, let's talk. Go up the list and say hi to everybody in the chat before I start. Robin, hello. Robert, hello. Lucky Wanderer, hello. Trans Gamer Girl, hey, I'll be checking you out later. City Life, Domino, DN Fan, Po Mama said Darius, and I think those are the people who've piped up so far, so thank you all. And also I'm organizing my lighting too. I think I might be overexposed here a little bit, so let me, still mucking about with the lighting in my room to get it right. It's very close to saying a naughty word there. Right. And also, yes, I can see that my two camera thing is also slightly awkward. So let me put this over here. I wanted to talk today a bit about the MAGA stuff, because when we look at Trump's future, so now let me just be honest. When it comes to politics, I like the election side of things. That's my favorite part. The competition, the messaging, understanding voters, all that kind of stuff. When we get to the point where we're doing policy, I still pay attention, but it's not my passion. I'm not a policy wonk. I'm not a public administration person. I'm more interested in getting the right people in power, like the people that I think will do the best job for the country. And once they're in power, then we have a whole different conversation. But like, you can't do anything until sounded ominous. No, that wasn't ominous. Well, maybe a little bit. Until you get power, there's really no point in discussing policy, because all you can do is stop the bad policies you see the other side doing if you don't have the power yourself. So first thing is first is always obtaining political power, for me, it's getting the Democrats. I'm going to say it again, I'd rather have Joe Manchin, who ticks me off and makes some bad votes, than a very, very progressive, liberal, left Republican in the Congress. Either the House or the Senate. So we're going to have a look at that. And while I'm pulling this up, I also want to let you guys know, okay, how am I going to do this? Oh, that's how I'm going to do it. I was running so late. This is so silly because I had so much prepped before I came on board. But anyway, I told you guys maybe that I've been working on this Sargon-y kind of thing. Okay, so I said then, I think what I said was that I was going to be working on a video about propaganda. And I give you an update on that while I set this up, because it is true. I'm currently reading a book, How Propaganda Works. What's up, Doc? Hello, Robert. The problem with the book, and this is going to sound like total shade, which I sort of don't mean it as, but also kind of I do, is it's written by a philosopher. Now, that sounds a lot shadier than it actually is meant to be. It's just that as a social scientist, I see the world quite differently from how philosophers kind of discuss it. So as a social scientist, I have this thing where, you know, I want to see really practical applications. I want so let's go over this. As a social scientist, when we want to engage with an empirical analysis of the world, other than things like age and years, which we can really find some sort of like, you want to say, objective, external metric, a lot of the things that we're dealing with, attitudes, beliefs, and values, are socially constructed. And so you can't just create like a thermometer that will consistently measure an attitude. One, because how you measure it depends on how you define it. And two, people are constantly moving. You know, they don't have the same kind of regularity that, say, not salt, just fresh water at the sea level, at what point it boils at. That's the same all over the globe. And people can literally change their minds within certain minutes, or within 5 minutes, or use different language to describe what they think is the same thing, but the person interviewing them interprets it as something different. So it's much more difficult to measure the social world. That doesn't mean that we don't do it. We just have to acknowledge that we get things that kind of measure it, but no one in the social sciences ever says, here's the perfect measurement we must use for all time. Usually it's the case of, well, it's a crappy measure, but we've always used it because the first people who did it, they were the ones who set this as a standard, and now we need to measure the same thing over time, so we have to ask this question in the same way over time so we can have comparability. But in the social sciences, what we have is, we have a stage of identifying a term. Let's say a term like democracy. Like, that is a factor in the world we can't directly observe. I can't go into a shop and buy bottled democracy. It's not it's not a manifestation. Rather, it's an agreement between people. So go, okay, here is this thing in the world, and it's called democracy. We know that it has an impact on how human relations exist. Okay, but then, humans being humans, we have this long history. So what do we mean by democracy? What are the elements of democracy? And that is not fixed. Athenian democracy, and how, let's say, democracy worked in terms of like the Roman Senate and the distribution of power, and how democracy worked when it was only white propertied men in America, or, adult men in England or whatever, who could vote, and then the franchise was expanded and expanded and expanded. So one could make the case that the United States was not a democracy. If you say that universal suffrage is a condition or a characteristic of a modern democracy, then America was not a modern democracy until the 1960s. Because even if it was technically legal, there wasn't a practical realization. One could say because of maybe voter suppression now, America is not truly a democratic ideal, because people's ability to cast their votes is interfered with on the basis of their background. In this case, if they're black voters who tend to vote Democratic, they are targeted by white Republicans. So then it gets really super messy, because we need to have a consistent measure. If you want to measure something, you can't have a different metric for every single thing, because then you're just doing like qualitative analysis. And that's fine, but you can't make generalizational statements. You can't make statements that are generalizable about democracy when you have a different metric for everyone. So what we do is think, okay, we have this concept, and we can have multiple definitions for democracy. We can have 7 or 8 different definitions for democracy, as long as the metrics we use describe which definition we're using. All right, so first is, what is the concept and its definitions? That's the first challenge, is, okay, which of these definitions, or a new definition perhaps, are we going to use to try to get to the thing that we see working in the world? Once you have that list, well, then you have to move from the abstract to the practical. So when we say free, fair, and frequent elections, how frequent is frequent enough? Is every 7 years frequent enough? Is every 15 years frequent? I mean, and again, these aren't clear things. These are judgment calls. So we have to move from a concept to its definitional abstractions, and then we have to move into the real world and start confronting those individual metrics. And then we go out and so it's like a 4-step process. And then we go out and we measure it entirely. Where was I going with this? I know one of the things I wanted to say about it. Oh, right, because the propaganda book. That was like, why did I get on this rant? That's how I see the world. Like, as a social scientist, I want to move basically quite quickly from theory being an explanation of the the interactions between a set of phenomenon that describe a causal process. I mean, I've got a very sort of like narrow, rigid, limited idea of what I want in my theories. No, I don't want to schedule, I want to update that. And so when I read philosophy, I understand there's a lot of abstraction that goes on there, which I understand because they're trying to speak not to a specific, but to a general. But I just find it so kind of like, I can't pin it down. Like they have the first part of it, or this author, I should say, has the first part of it and sort of like, here's my concept that I want to discuss. And then here is some definitions. But then when they trying to move from the practical to and the measurable, that's when it's really difficult. So this is what I'm reading, How Propaganda Works. You can see all of the glare, right? And I'm doing this because I want to kind of show more specifically in like the Lotus Flowers. So, you know, like there's Dave Rubin clips, there's Tim Pool clips, and there's kind of a gap in the market, shall we say, for the floater readers. And I feel like what else? Yeah, I can do that as a project. So I've been trying to look to this philosopher for an understanding of what a good definition, something very practical and transferable across different topics that I can draw upon to create a sort of criteria of propaganda and also identify the mechanism by which that propaganda is being delivered. So far, I'm very disappointed. For instance, there's an early chapter on propaganda which really relies on this idea of fraud. Okay, this is a side point. The idea of propaganda rests on the idea of the concept he calls a flawed ideology. But he spends the first part of the book discussing propaganda, and he doesn't discuss ideology until the second part of the book, which I don't understand, because if I don't have a clear idea of what a flawed ideology is before I understand how propaganda rests on it, then I have to like retrofit everything I've read about propaganda and after the second half of the book so I understand how the flawed... And the other thing he does, which is so philosopher, is he's like, I'm going to give you my definition of propaganda. Like, yeah, good, let's go, I'm excited. Then he's like, well, so-and-so said this, but this isn't right. And so-and-so said this, but this isn't right. And so-and-so said this, and I like this part, but not this part. I'm like, but yeah, where's your part? Like, you have like a 40-minute chapter in an audio book. I have the PDF for it too. And it's just like, I'm not going to remember what you said just give me your definition. Give me your definition first off, and then in each person's like historical thing, explain how it contrasts. Because I don't have time to read your entire chapter and hold all that in my mind till I get to the end. So you can tell that when it comes to my writing, I am like laying out my claims at the beginning, and I'm like leading the reader. I'm not letting them guess, like, here's what I think, and here's why, and blah, 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 blah. And I don't expect anyone to like remember my stuff for like days on end before I get to the point. So it's not a bad book. It's just I'm wading through it. And I do plan on finding some ways of explaining. I think I understand where he's coming from flawed ideology, but I have to come up with a more practical and applicable definition, I think. And then I'll also look at techniques of propaganda. So anyway, that's been my week. How y'all doing? All right, so we were going to talk a little bit today about Trump's... All right, so basically, so I'm going to check it in the chat. My busted butt glasses. I wash these darn things, and then I put on hair... I have to... Sorry, I'm getting a glare off of the hairspray. Christy without glasses, naked face! All right, my busted butt glasses. All right, good morning, good afternoon. Propaganda is just information. The intent behind it makes it good or bad. They would say no. In this book, that's not how they would define propaganda. And honestly, I have to go back because there's like 7 definitions of it. But they do have a pretty broad definition of propaganda. They talk about, in particular, he talks about Jason Stanley, I should say. And he's got talks on like how fascism works and how propaganda works. I'm just saying, like, yeah, I'm going to say it. I think I could have written a better book. but my book wouldn't have come from a philosophical perspective. And maybe there are social science books out there that just I missed when I was looking them up. But this is the one I paid for, so I'm going to darn well use it. But they talk about propaganda in terms of like in relation to ideologies. So propaganda isn't just information, like propaganda about Coca-Cola would not necessarily be propaganda in this book, because an ideology is a specific set of ideas, and then that propaganda is either designed to strengthen an idea and an ideology or undermine it. So I guess I can give a for instance relative to the Lotus Eaters. One of the things that is a part of, let's say, Karl's flawed ideology is the inherent contradiction between both advocating for what he thinks is like some sort of fair, equal society with some sort of meritocracy where it's not based on discrimination, these sort of liberal principles of sort of self-realization. But on the other hand, he is also defending systemic racist practices, beliefs, attitudes, and inheritances that prevent that meritocracy. So how can you both advocate for meritocracy and also and excuse the discrimination it's inherent in the system and therefore prevents anyone who isn't in that ideal group from attaining their full potential, or not having structural barriers or discrimination barriers be the reason that they don't go forward. And so the notion of propaganda in this book, at least, is tied to the idea of some sort of ideology, whether it's economic ideology or political ideology, religious ideology. I don't think that matters so much, but it has to be a set of beliefs. So just as an FYI, like I said, there might be other books out there. Non-rhetorical question: do you still think there can be a slant or point of view that doesn't have an agenda? I think that there is a difference between perspective, we'd say like perspective journalism or perspective opinion, and propaganda. And I think the most important part of propaganda is that it is somehow, there is an inherent, it depends on what you, again, I have to get into this a bit more, because I didn't get into his ideologies bit because he talked about the propaganda bit. And I'm not entirely sure what he means by a flawed ideology, because that comes at the end of the book. But I think there's something in there about like internal contradictions. But that is such a broad definition that basically nothing would escape propaganda. So I do think that, for instance, I don't think bias is necessarily propaganda. Kevin and I have a bias, undoubtedly. We're human beings, and it's also a complete lie. And I think it's hurt American journalism in particular to try to say, "Oh, we're just trying to give an objective perspective," when most of the objective perspective was coming from white men who came from a certain background. That's not objective. That's perspective. If you had other people writing those objective pieces, they would see other things. They would choose to put other things in the article. So it's, I don't know that complete objectivity in I think reporting, you can report accurate facts, but how you interpret them is, it's a matter of a subjective framing, no matter who does it. We don't have robots doing those things, And so I think the difference, I'm already talking too much, the difference between propaganda and a perspective is that I think propaganda tends to speak for the opponents. When Kevin and I do our stuff, we do put clips up of like Sean Hannity or Tucker Carlson or Dave Rubin or Carl, and we explain why we disagree with them. And we don't kind of like set up a whole bunch of like, we don't lie to you, at least not on purpose. We might make mistakes, but that's not, I don't think, a lie. Like we might get something wrong, we might remember a date wrong or a name wrong, but that's just error. We're not doing that intentionally to lie to you. Whereas, unfortunately, I'm watching, Lotus Eaters because I have to do research for this thing of debunking Carl and Joey, and they just straight up lie about what people think and their motivations. A lot of appeal to motive fallacies, a lot of straw manning, and so there's a lot of reliance on those kinds of misinformation techniques in order to substantiate. They can't substantiate their arguments on the basis of the facts, so they have to create these sort of alternative facts and alternative realities. So I do think that you can have a when you say a slant or a viewpoint that doesn't have agenda, your agenda is your viewpoint. So I don't think it's possible for someone to not have a perspective. I think we all have perspectives, and that is part of the thing about intersectionality. understanding that there isn't one, like the New York Times or whoever wrote it isn't the authority. Other people have perspectives. Okay, talking way too much. Fascinating detour. Thank you to Goat. I appreciate that. Right, so as a consequence, I was listening to Carl and Joey. It's just difficult because like I have to stop every couple minutes and just yell at them for being how dumb and like just. And the one that I was watching, because I can't watch them all, it's just too many, but the one that I was looking at most recently was multiracial whiteness. Now, there's a concept that blows their little minds, and there's just so much crap talked about in that segment. It's hard to unpack it. So that's what I'm doing in the background. I'm trying to get ready for this series. Facts are secondary. I think facts are the framework on which you construct your house argument. You can, I think I don't want to do the David Hume is ought issue. I don't think you can go from is to ought, but I do think you can use is as evidence of a moral argument. So I think how understanding that you're making that step from is to ought and declaring it is the important thing. Okay, so yes, I don't really care about and that's I don't really care, but I'm just not as passionate about policy issues. So let's talk a little bit about politics again, let's talk about Trump. And I just say that because moving forward, like the Democratic Party has, we'll call it like the progressive wing. The progressive wing, here's the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans in terms of where they're more extreme parts of their base are located. So with the Republicans, their extremists are their base. I mean, the kind of like rural rural whites, we say, is where you get the most extremists. And I think on the Democratic side, although there are people who are progressive all over the country, they can't exercise the same amount of influence in the Democratic Party as Republican extremists do in the Republican Party, because there are a handful of places where that truly far left, shall we say, or I don't know, like very liberal. Again, liberal people go like, no, liberals, but for conservative liberal districts in the U.S. and certainly not on the state level. It's very difficult to get someone as far on the left in the Senate as it is to get someone to the extreme right in the Senate. And that's because of where it's sort of the distribution of who makes up the parties and where their bases are located. So you can get very left-wing members of Congress like AOC, like Mark Pocan. So there are places, like San Francisco, Madison, Austin, parts of New York, little pockets here and there. But I think it's much more difficult for the progressives to have that kind of same far left pull just based on their concentration in urban areas. And then that is combined, that's not with the Democrats doing it, but Republicans therefore also try to end up limiting that by usually gerrymandering, the areas that have the most progressive voters in order to kind of pack them all and they only get one seat. So there are structural reasons, there are political reasons. And therefore, even though, if AOC wanted to break off, and form her own party in a sort of similar way that Trump is, it's going to be much more difficult for her to get any traction outside of those very liberal pockets of voting, right? There might be individuals around the country, but if you live in the Fox Valley of Wisconsin, it's not going to matter that you love that agenda. They're going to vote. That's a historically Republican area. But with Trump, with the Republicans, their entire base has been pushed to the right, farther and farther to the right. The way that they've gone after the mainstream media and created their own little media echo chamber in Fox News has been a cycle of radicalization. And now they've gotten themselves to a situation where they have a bunch of people who don't care about the Constitution as much. They say they do, but they don't. They don't care about Republican Party values as a set of values. They love Trump. They love the man. And whereas I will for me, the Democratic Party is a revolving door. whoever comes in and out, the point is the agenda, the point are the principles, the point are the values, and moving those forward. On the other side, if you've got a cult-like devotion, it doesn't matter how great your candidates are. If they disagree with the cult leader, the base ain't going to follow them. And that is the position where the Republicans find themselves right now. Do I think Trump is serious about forming another party? I can't say. I do see where he now sees that it's politically advantageous to threaten it. And that's ultimately all you can really deal with when it comes to Trump. He's always looking out for his short-term interests, right? It's like, how shadowed am I? Am I like, should I turn this a little bit? Yeah, I think that's a little bit better. Still playing around with the lighting here. So let's have a look at this article from the Washington Post. So are you guys still discussing? Yeah, propaganda is a super. Maybe I'll have more of a read, and we'll have a conversation about how propaganda works, because it is. Can I just say, like, gosh, someone. I think it was maybe someone who was talking about time, and they said, "I know what it is until you ask me to define it." And I feel like the propaganda is very much the same way. Like, yeah, I know what propaganda is, but then when you actually try to define it, what you find is that it's a very nebulous word. So, is there any weight to this so-called Patriot Party? I'm going to say Jein, which is a beautiful German word meaning yes and no. I think that right now it's too early to tell where this is really going to go. You are absolutely right. Part of it is that Trump wants to leverage this as a way to threaten Republicans who vote for his impeachment. And so in that way, I don't see it as being a serious effort. The real question, the real line, I'll tell you where the real line is. When they start spending money, just like anyone who says, I'm thinking about running for president, or who's rumored to run for president, whose names are floated for running for president, it doesn't matter, and none of that matters until you start a committee and you start raising money. That's when you know people are serious. The rest of it is just talk. Until they start raising money, it's just talk. And I think that would be a good metric for this as well, but that doesn't mean this is just talk. That's the only place it's going to go. It might go somewhere else. So let us look at this article. Trump jumps into a divisive battle over the Republican Party with the threat to start a MAGA Party, or the Patriot Party, it's also been referred to. Where is that block light coming from? Sorry, I'm annoyed by shadows. I'm trying to set this up. I did such a poor job beforehand. Sorry, everyone. Right, this is by Josh Dawsey and Michael Shearer. 24th of January, 2021. Former President Donald Trump threw himself back into politics this weekend by publicly endorsing a devoted and divisive acolyte in Arizona who has embraced his false election conspiracy theories and entertained the creation of a new MAGA party. In a recorded phone call, Trump offered his, quote, complete and total endorsement, unquote, for another term for Arizona State Party Chairwoman Kelly Ward, a lightning rod who has sparred with the state's Republican governor, been condemned by the business community, and overseen a recent flight in party registrations. Also, just because they don't form the party doesn't mean there's going to be knock-on effects, as we'll see below. She narrowly won re-election by a margin of 51.5% to 48.5%, marking Trump's first victory in a promised battle to maintain political relevance and influence after losing the 2020 election. In recent weeks, Trump has entertained the idea of creating a third party called the Patriot Party and instructed his aides to prepare election challenges to lawmakers who crossed him in the final weeks in office. It just shows you that the Patriot Party is not about values or political, like I say, political attitudes or beliefs. This is a weapon. This is a thing that Trump can weaponize, and that's all he cares about. There's no core beliefs here that they're objecting to. It's just loyalty to a man. Hi, Bruce, by the way. Hope you're doing well. Is it more probable that mainstream Republicans will break away from their base because they could get more votes and donations way to the left now? Hi. I think the Republicans who are not on board the Trump train feel very trapped. They don't have enough centrists. So if you take away the voters who are diehard loyalists for Trump, let's say that in a given state, because, like some places are more Democratic leaning, some places are more Republican leaning, some places are purple. But if you have a split in the Republican Party, you've got, I think about, maybe a third that aren't cultists. And those people are leaving more and more. So I don't know that, I can't foresee yet how the Republican Party would react to a MAGA party. It's just too many hypotheticals down the line. But clearly, this is something they're afraid of. Now, on the one hand, the Republicans are in a bad place, just like the Democrats were in 2016, because generally the president is the leader of the party. Whoever is in the White House is the de facto and du jour face of your party. They are the leader of your party, and therefore you take your direction from him or her someday. When your party is out of the White House, your next in lines are whatever your minority or majority leaders in the Congress, and those people just aren't as out there. It's not the same thing to be the Speaker of the House, in, let's say, like the case of Nancy Pelosi, because Chuck Schumer was in the minority. Nancy Pelosi was not like the leader of the party. She was the leader in the House, but we don't have that sort of equivalent when your party doesn't have the White House. With Biden in the White House, he is now the face of the Democratic Party. He is the sort of like the leader of the party. And Republicans really should be looking to someone like Mitch McConnell as the leader of their party, or somehow some combo with Kevin McCarthy. But instead, they've got an ousted president who isn't interested in their legislation, who doesn't pay attention to the day-to-day needs of what Republicans are dealing with in the Congress. He's off on a revenge tour. He's off, using his political clout to punish Republicans. This is only disruptive for the party, I think. Right. So he wants to, primary Liz Cheney, Brian Kemp, and Lisa Murkowski, Tom Rice. All this is just like a revenge, agenda. Multiple people in Trump's orbit who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss private conversations say Trump has told people that the third-party threat gives him leverage to prevent Republican senators from voting to convict him during the Senate impeachment trial. Do I think that is his most immediate goal? Yes. Absolutely. I think he's really struggling because he's not on Twitter, and it's so nice. Oh, it is so nice to not have him on social media and lying and just inserting himself. You remember that image of him pushing the Moldovan, I think it was, prime minister or president out of the way so that he could get right in the front because he's an egotistical, uncouth Neanderthal, which is an insult to the Neanderthals? He would still be doing that. He would still be pushing everybody out of the way if he was on social media, and it's so good that he's not. But that's problem one the Republicans have. That Trump, who is trying to maintain his position as leader of their party, doesn't have the party's interest at heart. Number two, this is the next big problem they face. Trump advisors also say they plan to recruit opposing primary candidates and commission polling next week in districts of targeted lawmakers. Trump has more than $17 million in campaign cash banked to fund his political efforts. So he is not only not giving a crap about Republicans in Congress, he is actively sucking up their money and getting them in trouble with his insurrections where they won't be able to raise money. Because he doesn't care about he doesn't care about the conservative agenda. He just cares about himself. He's just continuing to suck it up. Do I think Trump will run for president in 2024? Yes. I mean, if he's still around and healthy enough, yes. That is what he's going to bank his entire next 4 years on, raise money about. He's going to continue to dangle that out there. He's going to treat it like another episode of The Apprentice. And he might go for like 3 years. 3.5 years dangling that out, and then at the end, not decide to run. I don't know what he's going to do. He's unpredictable. But he is not going to, he's not going to remove himself from contention. Just think about the way that he's like, in 2 weeks, I'm going to have an announcement. I'm going to say, it's always teasing. It's always trying to manipulate people into paying attention to him. The Republicans asked for it, and now they're getting it. The prospect, going back to the article, of a divisive battle threatens to widen a split in the Republican Party and has alarmed leaders in Washington who have been pleading publicly to avoid any new rounds of internecine retribution. Do they know Donald Trump? um, Bruce says, I see no loyal opposition in the U.S. system. I agree. I don't think that, I mean, if you wanted to be incredibly generous, you could maybe make an argument for like a Mitt Romney, but he doesn't step up. You could have made maybe an argument for John McCain, but I think a lot of his maverick stuff was more about his image than his belief system. So, yeah, and also the kinds of loyalty that the far right and the center right have are not to the principles of America, it's to maintaining the supremacy of white people in positions of power in America. So in a lot of ways, I question the concept of the loyal opposition in American politics at all. Thanks, Bruce. All right, so yes, Liz Cheney, they're trying to get her out. McDaniel, who is the leader of the RNC, has also spoken out about the idea of a third-party split while repeatedly pushing back against move by Arizona state party leaders to censure, which they did this weekend, fellow Republicans such as Doug Ducey and Cindy McCain, who have broken with Trump. The Arizona party on Saturday night censured Ducey, McCain, and former Arizona Senator Jeff Flake, all longtime established Republicans. This is funny. Quote, having differences in the party is fine. Being a party that is adamantly against cancel culture, we need to recognize that purging isn't good. Let the voters make the decisions, unquote. Yeah, they always love to complain about cancel culture and use it as well. The only way we, quote, the only way we win in 2022 is if we start getting rid of this purism and cancel culture in our own party. How about getting rid of the cult-like devotion to a man who is emotionally unstable? Right. So Lindsey Graham, quote, we've got to go together and be a party together. I'm into winning. I'm into conservatives who can win, unquote. Lindsey Graham is a dinosaur now in his own party. He sold his soul. So we, just moving down, this is Henry Barber, a Mississippi National Committeeman who serves on the board of the Data Trust, a company that manages the Republican Party's data infrastructure. He says, quote, what we have seen in President Trump is an incredible politician, but one who is limited to getting 46 or 47% of the national vote. We can win over 50% if we grow the party by addition, not division. Question is, where are y'all going to get that extra 3%? Are you going to use it? Are you going to get by going to white communities and trying to gin up racial tensions and hatred and demonization of everyone on the left? Or are you going to make your party less racist and more inclusive? This is a fundamental existential question for the GOP. There is a shrinking proportion of the population that's white enough that they could get to. And even portions of the white population now are moving away from the party. The difference between the 1960s, I think, and the 2000, let's say, 20-ish, 19-ish issues of racial justice is that, from my understanding, in the 1960s, the people who got woke to issues of civil rights were pretty much like college students and some like elite liberals, but it didn't filter down to your average white people, like your average sort of rural areas. And in the 21st century, with the George Floyd issue and a cop getting caught on video shooting a man in the back as he ran away, these sorts of things, like the evidence crashes against the white supremacist denial that black people just complain and that they're liars. When you see that they're not liars and their complaints are valid again and again and again, it starts to break down that suspension of disbelief when it comes to weighting things on the side of police. And I think because of that, the need for racial justice has really drifted farther down into the white population, and including the suburbs. And as you get more college-educated whites, they increasingly see the validity of the complaints. And that is a problem for the Republican Party. Because those people, it is, once you become anti-racist actively, it's very difficult to like unsee what you've seen. And so their white base is keeping them on their kind of purist stuff about being exclusionary, but on the other hand, where they need to get the votes are in the suburbs, and they need to expand into more demographics than just white. So they're getting pulled in two different directions. And will they split apart? Let's hope so. So I don't see how you can grow the Trump party. I don't see it. As it stands now, the big tent is tearing at the edges. Business groups have called for the Grand Old Party purge of more extreme leaders. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has blamed Trump and other Republicans for provoking the U.S. Capitol riot, and McCarthy has said that Trump bears responsibility for the attacks by not immediately denouncing the violence once it began, although he later said he did not believe Trump provoked the riots. So he bears responsibility that he didn't provoke it. Trump's fiercest supporters in Congress, meanwhile, have continued to threaten and denounce those who criticized the former president, repeatedly raising the prospect of a more fundamental party division. Adding to the conflict, Republican voters remain overwhelmingly supportive of Trump. They're in a cult. You can't, reason with cultists, because they are extreme in their ideology, suggesting strength in primary races that the establishment figures fear could prompt losses in competitive states and national races. Bring it on. Yes, I love it. A recent Washington Post ABC News poll found that 6 in 10 Republicans believe the party should follow Trump's leadership going forward rather than chart a new path. 6 in 10, that's 60% of their voters, want cult-like devotion to this man. And it's ridiculous. Sorry, I'm mucking about with here because I'm realizing I'm leaning forward and I'm not always centered, so I'm trying to fix that. Hey, as a professional show, right? Yeah, quote, "Here's a warning the GOP needs to hear," tweeted Representative Taylor Greene, the newly elected member who has embraced Trump's conspiratorial views and made supportive comments about the extremist group, QAnon. Quote, "The vast majority of Republican voters, volunteers, and donors are no longer loyal to the GOP, Republican Party, and candidates just because they have an R by their name. Their loyalty now lies with Donald J. Trump," unquote. How terrifying. How absolutely terrifying in America that you have this cult of personality. I mean, I can't think. In politics, I perhaps there's a Huey Long, but I mean, I don't know enough about the life and times of Huey Long to know if he ever got this sort of cult-like devotion. But they're in a cult. So, same tensions are also playing out in the States, where grassroots party apparatuses have rebelled against calls to accept Biden as the duly elected president. The state party of Wyoming, where Cheney serves, previously demanded that the Electoral College results be rejected in Congress. I think we covered in the happy hour about how, like, Wisconsin Republican chairs are quitting because the people aren't loyal enough to Trump. So I think we're just going to scroll down because I want to get some of your comments before the last part of the show. And let's see. Oh, God. Yes. Now, let's see. On the day of the Capitol riot, Ward, I don't know who this Ward person is, trying to go up a little bit to see if I can find out. I don't know, maybe they were mentioned. It's not Taylor Greene. Don't know who Ward is. We're just going to go with it. Was Ward the... All right, was Ward the person who... Sorry, Ward was expected to win re-election, though her margin was narrow. Oh, this must be the Arizona person. Okay, yep. She presented her candidacy as the only option to keep the Arizona party from going, quote, "back to the dark days before Trump," unquote. Let that simmer. Let that simmer. This woman, who is now the re-elected Arizona Republican Party chair, wanted to make sure we didn't go back to the dark days before the cult-like devotion to Trump. She said Trump had asked her to run in a private meeting and then played the recorded message from him endorsing her candidacy. Quote, "The president is watching today's race very closely," she said, unquote. Now, they're going to talk about a poll here, and obviously it's the most extreme, most activist people who are probably like, it's a poll on her Twitter account, which just represents all the people who follow her on Twitter. But this Ward lady, on the day of the Capitol riot, posted a poll on her Twitter account asking, quote, "Can we salvage / save the Republican Party, or do we need another option?" unquote. Salvage it received 8% of the responses, compared with 78% who said hashtag MAGA Party needed. Now, obviously, she's going to get the most extreme people following her, but then again, the most extreme people are also the most active. Your activists are the ones who are least like the average voter. Your average voter does not know a lot about policies. Your average voter doesn't have, maybe on a couple issues, really deep, well thought out, articulated feelings. But on general policy stuff, they kind of like just kind of go with their gut or bring in some inferences. But your activists know things and they care about things and they're more extreme. That's why they're motivated to move, because they are more engaged than your average person. But if your activist base is so far away from where your potential voters are, that's where you get massive, massive problems. Though Republicans performed well down ballot in 2020, they have lost 2 U.S. Senate seats since 2018. I think it's actually a more important number there. Sorry, is to say that Republicans lost the Senate for the first time since 2009 under Donald Trump. And since 2009, Mitch McConnell has been messing up our country. Was it 2009? No, because Obama had 2 years. When did he? 2008. It must have been 2011. When did they? Yeah, it must have been 2011. I think whoever wrote that in Twitter must have been wrong, because he had because Obama in 2000. I have to go back. It's been a long time. It's been a long time. Take all that back. Rewind. All right. Chamber of Commerce is also freaking out, which I love, because they fund the GOP and keep their evil agendas going. Quote, right now on the Republican side, I don't have a word to describe what's going on, unquote. Arizona Chamber of Commerce and Industry President Glenn Hammer said, quote, whatever the worst case scenario is, this is worse. There will be a reaction to this. I have no doubt about it, unquote. Fight, 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 fight. Yeah. I mean, all of this is to the better. Look, progressives and people in the center left already have so many structural advantages against them because of the history of white supremacists writing rules to maintain their own power structures, that it might take, the GOP ripping itself apart to actually have a better representation of what the American people want through the Democratic Party. This goes on and on and on, but basically, that's the assessment. Right now, it's too early to tell. However, Trump is still doing his thing, which is he's going to be looking out for number one, and he is going to step on and use and abuse and lie to whomever he needs to for as long as he can to get what he wants. So I absolutely think the MAGA Party, this will go forward. This will absolutely go forward. And it will, here's some spin. This is the end of the article, which is pretty hilarious. Grover Norquist. You know why you haven't heard the name Grover Norquist for pretty much the entire Trump presidency, when you used to hear his name all the time? It's because he doesn't matter anymore. Like, Grover Norquist was the enforcer of the Republican Party. He made every Republican sign some sort of pledge about like not raising taxes unless you can offset taxes somewhere else. And all of these people signed this ridiculous pledge, and then he would just hold it over their heads, and he raised a lot of money, and he used that power to but he was the one who famously said, I want to make the federal government small enough where I can drown it in a bathtub. Right? This guy you don't hear from anymore, because you know what? Fiscal conservatism isn't part of Trumpism. He blew up the deficit. He'll spend money on whatever he wants to make him either look good or add money to his pocket. So Grover Norquist is just like, who? Anyway, he said, quote, you can count yourself to sleep at night by recounting the number of times the establishment has said that the Republican Party is dead, unquote. What establishment? What is he talking about? This is like, Grover Norquist is out of step with where the base is. He doesn't understand that the Trump base that he used to rely on to turn out and hated Democrats, they now have a cult-like devotion to a man with no principles. It was never about tax reform. It was never about regulation. That was just like the petit bourgeois and the bourgeois narratives that East Coast elitist Republicans threw on top of and sprinkled into, the religious fundamentalist anti-abortion single-issue voters, because, single-issue voters are so smart, And the same thing with the guns thing. Whip up fear about your guns and then just vote on the NRA. For people who don't just vote on abortion, vote on guns, vote on taxes. There's no ideology there. There's just single issue things. Yeah, Norquist doesn't matter when the Republicans are in charge. Yeah, they'll also, the other thing is that they'll spend money like drunken sailors, as McCain famously said, I think, in the last century. So my forecast, will the MAGA Party be formed? I think it will continue to be threatened, and there will be various machinations about setting something up or putting out the threat. What Trump is really good at, that we've learned, is talking crap. What he's not good at is putting his money where his mouth is. That is harder to predict. For instance, people didn't always believe he was going to run for president, and he did. But I do see that as long as he sees this third party as a cudgel with which to smash up and threaten Republicans, of course he's going to use it. Why wouldn't he? He doesn't care about the Republican Party. He doesn't care about divisions within the Republican. He doesn't care about the long-term agenda or even advancing conservatism. He wants to not be held legally accountable for all of the crimes he did before he was president and while he was president and after. He's probably doing them right now. And that's the only thing that motivates him. So I think I welcome a MAGA party. I mean, it just make it easier. It will force Republicans to make a choice. People like Ted Cruz, like Josh Hawley. Where do they really stand? I mean, I think we already know. But a third party would be a very nice way to ensure a lot more Democratic successes in swing districts. It won't help in the deep red areas, but on the margins, if you get, the more you get extreme candidates, the less likely they are to win. And extreme is district dependent. So Ocasio-Cortez is not extreme in relation to where she is relative to her constituents. But there's no way she's going to win in Iowa. There's no way she's going to win with that agenda in maybe even the suburbs of Georgia. There's just she is relative, to her constituents. And if the MAGA people get increasingly more cult-like, that's going to create more space for people to not vote or vote for a third party. If you take 5 to 6, 7% of the Republican base away in some of these swing districts, you're going to get an overwhelming, enough plurality for the Democrat. It doesn't take, the swing districts don't take that much, a swing of 3, 4, 5%. And that can be not turnout, or people who do turn out and just don't vote in that election, vote other parts of the ticket. So, go Trump. That's kind of a weird thing. I've never said that, but yeah, why not? I'll sit back and watch you guys eat yourselves alive. I mean, as much as we have arguments within the Democratic Party, the kind of arguments we're having are nowhere near. Like I said, there's a whole distribution of where the radicalization is in your base, your voter base. And the fact is that Republicans just have more radicalized people across the country relative to where the median voter is than Democrats do. All right, so let's see what people are saying. What do I think about force the vote? What is force the vote? I don't even know what that is. Was that the, no, I don't know. I don't know, Wizard. I don't know what I think about that because I'm not sure what you mean. So let me move over. I'll make you guys bigger. That's what she said. Right. Good to see you live. Hi, Sophia. Welcome. We're glad you're here live as well. Wow, that was not what I wanted to do. Come on, stop being, ugh. Sometimes this thing just drives me so nuts. Okay, there we go. I'm blinded because of the bright, bright light in this eye that I moved to get no shadow. Now I can't see where there it is. All right, so let's come down here. I think Trans Gamer Girl said she had to get going, right? Didn't you say you were going somewhere? All right, it's correct. Failure to purge the GOP will inevitably move the party to the right and eventually become a fascist party. I like how, Emma, I like how you have eventually. I love your optimism. I think there are sections in the Trumpists that are they're already pro-fascist. They tried to overthrow a democratic election by spreading lies. So I appreciate your optimism there. I feel my glasses are sliding off or apart. All right, Domino Masked flops around the original Star Trek cast when the camera tilts. Oh, right. Wah! What do I think about force the vote? I, again, don't know what that is, Wizard. If you want to expand in the comments, I will catch up with you later. Ronald Reagan had a big cult of personality. I do think that he had, yes, a following, but the difference is that Ronald Reagan, because they did talk about Saint Ron, and they totally venerated him after he died beyond what he deserved, but he was articulating a set of principles that was consistent with where the Republican Party wanted to go. And so, as much as he did, like, you know, the Iran-Contra stuff and other things while he was in office, he was, I think, primarily putting forth an ideology. And Trump doesn't have an ideology. He just doesn't. And I think the difference is that people would be loyal to Trump no matter what he did. Whereas Reagan would still get some criticism from the right if he, you know, I think there was still, it's not quite as intense. And yeah, I think it wasn't quite the cult of personality, but he was definitely a force, and, you know, charismatic one. Yeah, so I don't think he had it's not comparable with Trump. There are people who will vote for anything as long as Trump wants it. Oh, it's the goat. Okay. 2 dogs wanting walks. Oh yes, walkies, walkies, walkies. Good times. There's some room between personality cult and cult. I think there is a devotion to, like, for instance, the way that they talk about him as Saint Ron. However, they weren't slavishly devoted to whatever policy he wanted at the time. I think there was still some distance there. Erica Baker, Christy Winters, Blistering Whispers, Misty Sisters, Whiskey Sinkers, Pissy Thinkers, Witty Twitters, Miss Pinder. Thank you for the bar. I don't know what that was about, and it might have got me demonetized. Thank you. Domino Masked. I don't know if Cruz doubling down and leaning into his Trumpianism or McConnell trying to pretend he never won ticks me off more. That's why I think in some ways the creation of a Patriot Party or a MAGA Party would be very clarifying. Very clarifying for the Republican Party. Bring it on. Bring it on. Bring it on. Yay, the Republicans tearing in half. Absolutely. Norquist doesn't matter when Republicans are in charge. Exactly. He'll back down. Now Biden is president. Who I don't know. Oh, Grover Norquist. Grover Norquist is politically irrelevant right now. Definitely. I would agree with you on that. He doesn't carry any weight in the House. And he doesn't have any, like, Republicans can try to listen to him in the Senate, but they didn't he didn't do anything about the deficits in the last 4 years. So get out of here. Bruce, in an effective 2-party state, theoretically, the fight should be for the center. Correct, where most of the votes are. The center of a normal distribution, precisely. What happened to the GOP and Reagan? I can tell you, Bruce. So yes, this is classic Duverger's law, and there are a couple assumptions that go into Duverger's law. Oh, it's time to go! All right, I'm going to do this fast. Basically, the assumption is that in a population, in a 2-party system, that most of the voters will be in the center. There'll be some sort of normal distribution. It might be a little bit skewed to the left. It might be a little bit skewed to the right, depending on the issue, depending on the situation. But when you get to, let's say the communists are the far left, and Trump fascists are the far right. In theory, they should make up the smallest part of the population, and then as you get toward the center, people get more and more centrist. It's not a really great way of describing it, but so we have this normal distribution. And the parties have to do this dance. They need, in the primaries, to run to the left or to the right in order to get the activists, the people who care about stuff, people who are going to volunteer for free, knock on doors, make phone calls, give money, and they need those people. But those people are also the farthest from the political center. And then when you win the general, they have to run toward that median voter in order to get enough votes to win. It's a popularity contest at the end of the day. And I think the reason why the American system doesn't work like that and it's so distorted is because primarily of gerrymandering. And when you draw the districts such that the Republican primary is the general, you create a false distribution of where the voters lie. Right, you're creating the normal curve in a way that you're moving it increasingly to the right. Well, I guess, for you guys to be this way. So you're moving it increasingly to the right so that you don't have to move as close to the median in order to win. And then the entire party moves farther and farther right. The problem was the Republicans in some ways are such victims of their own success that they have now insulated themselves from a centrist challenger. They have insulated themselves from a check on that right-wing pull. And Trump has sucked up all of that right-wing energy and made it about him. And now, because they exist in these districts where the most extreme person... Trans Gamer Girl, I answer all kinds of your questions. Like, everyone needs to get a chance. That normal curve now doesn't exist politically the way that it does in the population. So there's a mismatch. And that's why they are so beholden to their base, is because they've made their base their general election population. And they're just more and more extreme. That would be my explanation. I think it will squander all its fighting power for anyone or anything other than Trump that sees as a threat to himself. That includes anyone that threatens to replace him as a conservative cult leader. Yeah. I think Trump is basically going to continue to use and wield as much power as he can until he dies. The only thing that he is going to get to, get him out of our political system is disability or death. Otherwise, he's going to continue to muck about because he's got legal problems in New York. He's still named as individual number one in the Cohen case, which Cohen went to jail for. He's got his tax issues. The tax issue that now his taxes, I think, are going to the House, and the House, Congress has to give him like so many days notice that they're going to like get his taxes. The Georgia thing is moving forward, the phone call and the election interference. So he's got legal problems up and down the line that he needs to be using his political capital to try to get himself out of. So, all right, Trans Gamer Girl, what did you say that I skipped your comment? I have to go back. I think between Trump's denouncement and people realizing the plan was just BS, Truth is hemorrhaging supporters, I don't think he is. I think that they are stopped believing in the plan, but I think that we'll have to look at the numbers, but I don't think there are that many people who are blaming Trump. They're blaming Q, if that makes sense. I think they kind of see these things as differently. So I would have to check the numbers. We'll look at the polling in terms of support for President Trump in self-identified Republicans, but I don't think that he's really hemorrhaging that many supporters. Maybe in Congress, but not in the rank and file. And the ones that are staying are the ones who drunk the Kool-Aid but are still drinking it. The question is, would Trump be able to keep people drinking that Kool-Aid for the next 3 years? Thing is, here's what I would say is a lot of the people who are already alienated by the Never Trumpers already left the party. And there are a couple people, like I think in Arizona, there was part of the article I didn't read you, that after the Capitol riots, the Republican Party saw 5,000 people in the state of Arizona leave the party, whereas like 900 people left the Democratic Party. But, that's 5,000 people in the whole state of Arizona. I think that Trump's already purged there's been a lot of self-purging out of the GOP, and I think that he doesn't have that much farther down to go. I think his base in that party is pretty solid, personally. But I would have to see the data. That's speculation until I see some survey data. Those who... all right, so force the vote. Oh, it's Jimmy Dore thing. Oh, force the vote is just performative virtue signaling. I don't see this. For me, it's a terrible waste of political capital. All right, so you're going to say force the vote on M for A. That is a meaningless statement to me because M for A is a concept. It's not a bill. Right? And when you talk about M for A, what do you mean like you're going to have a vote? You're just going to introduce a bill and not let any member of Congress amend it or debate it or have a hearing on it? Is it just performative to say, okay, we want to exercise our political capital over you and threaten the Speaker of the House to get something we could have gotten anyway just by introducing a bill? So I think it's a terrible idea. I think Jimmy Dore is obviously in some ways he was doing, I think, people, this is a controversial comment, but I think he was doing to AOC what AOC does to all the Democrats. And so I didn't really mind it that much. I think AOC asks for ridiculous things and uses her platform and demanding things that aren't reasonably done in the House to make herself look good and make the House Democrats look like the problem, when really she's created a situation that's not realistic in terms of how it can be politically solved. I think Jimmy Dore did the same thing to her, and I didn't have a problem with that because that's just called political pressure. He was putting political pressure on her. Do I think it was good political pressure? Do I think he was arguing for an effective strategy? No, it was totally performative. But he has the right to call her out on that. because again, she does the same things. So I was like, I'm not going to stand AOC when it's just Jimmy Dore being performative. I mean, if he was being sexist or whatever else, but I mean, that's what she signed up for as a member of Congress, is to be pressured by her constituents. Why should I feel bad? I mean, just because his idea is bad doesn't mean, like, I can condemn both. Like, I basically say Jimmy Dore is a fool. On the other hand, I mean, like, that's what you get when you get into Congress, AOC. Like, welcome to the club. People are going to crap on you from every direction. That's what it means to be an elected member of Congress. All right, Emma, those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. Best evidence for a two-party system, so radical parties get no influence. Okay, I'll leave that there. The actress said to the bishop, did I see the reports of some of the insurrectionists were getting live text messages saying where the politicians were moving and being located? I did see that QAnon, Representative QAnon had texted out that the speaker had left the chambers, which they were specifically instructed by the security detail to not talk about the whereabouts of members. So I did see that, if that's what you meant. Should have said full fascist. Okay. Trump is gone. Ding dong. Don't forget to flush. Poetry. Corman, eat your heart out. Yes. Thank you, Bruce. Rosso. Hey. Hi, Christy. Hi, back. Deficits only matter to Republicans when Dems aren't correct. Yeah, the Republicans are quite happy to run up the deficit in order to give tax breaks and tax credits to billionaires, but they won't give people who are staying at home to make other people safe enough money to put food on their plates. Yeah. They hate the workers. I don't understand. Like, this is how the GOP got around the problem of lower economic status whites voting against their own economic interests, which is you give them something to hate and fear more than more. Right? You hate, you basically make you fetishize guns and make them into some sort of, you equate them with your patriotism, and then tell people they're going to take away your guns even though they're not going to, and then people vote based on their single issue. Or you get evangelicals who have certain evangelicals, white evangelicals, but maybe not all white, like just white evangelicals, but they are primed for hierarchy. They are primed for submission. They are primed for following a king. And so when you then, get Trump, and so, like, just vote on abortion, vote on judges. What they're not doing is looking at the economic stuff, No, I didn't. So, Lucky Wanderer, no, I did not know insurrectionists were being told where the House representatives were moving. No, I didn't see that. So if you want to grab that information and tag me in it on Twitter, I'll look at it and maybe put it in my bookmarks. All right, I've gone 10 minutes over, but at least I stayed on topic. Looking in the future, like I said, I'm going to listen more about this thing of propaganda. Let's talk about it next week. If you're interested, again, if you want to have a look, it's not a difficult book. It's a very academic book. It's a really, really academic book. And the best piece of advice that my PhD supervisor ever gave me was, your thesis isn't a murder mystery. It's not a mystery novel. Don't wait till the last chapter to explain to people what you found. Start from the very beginning, declaring what it's going to be about, and then give them a roadmap of how you got there, and you're going to take them through it. So, can it get even weirder than the Capitol riots? Hopefully not. Fingers crossed. And on that note of peace and brotherly love and sisterly love, fraternity, sorority, all that, I'm going to get going because I've got things to do today, including prep for my D&D session, which will be at 7 o'clock. That is in, like, what time is it? 1 o'clock now, so 6 hours, a little bit from now. And I will be back here next Sunday, unless I'm sick or something else comes up. Thank you for stopping by and spending a bit of your time with me. Well, let's just continue. I'll tell you where I'm getting on this. We'll talk a bit more about propaganda and maybe look at some examples in the Lotus Eaters and see how my project is coming with the video. All right, thank you so much. Yes, Transgamer Girl, I will see you later. And this evening, everyone else in the chat, thank you so much again for stopping by. Mwah, mwah, mwah. Appreciate it. Until next Sunday. I've been Christy, you've been awesome, and we'll see each other again really soon, she says awkwardly as she looks over to her left in order to find the right page in order to end the stream. Okay. Catch you guys later. Bye.